Today, we're getting into the story of Akwasi Afrifa, a major player in Ghana's history whose legacy is, well, it's complicated. So complicated, in fact, that people still fiercely debate whether he was a national hero or a traitor. Let's dig in.
And that's really the heart of it, isn't it? Savior or schemer. Because depending on who you talk to, you'll get two completely different stories. Was he the guy who saved Ghana from a dictator, or was he the ambitious schemer who kicked off decades of chaos?
So you've got these two totally different takes on the guy. On one hand, he's seen as this principled Democrat who literally rescued the nation from tyranny and then handed power right back to the people. But on the other hand, he's seen as a power-hungry opportunist who committed treason and in doing so created a blueprint for every military coup that came after. Let's look at both sides of the argument.
All right, first up, let's build the case for Afrifa the Democrat. What's the evidence that his actions were really about saving the country?
So to really get why Afrifa did what he did, you have to understand the political scene back then. He and the other coup plotters, they argued they weren't just grabbing power for themselves. No, they saw themselves as hitting the brakes on a country that, under its first prime minister, Kwame Nkrumah, was sliding fast into a dictatorship. And you know, this wasn't just some vague feeling. They had a whole list of reasons. They pointed to stuff like the Preventative Detention Act, which basically let the government lock people up without a trial. They pointed to a move to make Ghana a one-party state and to judges being fired left and right. For them, these weren't just policy disagreements, they were signs of a democracy on life support.
Now, here's the kicker, the thing that really props up the whole Democrat argument. Unlike so many military leaders who grabbed power and never let go, Afrifa actually followed through on his promise. By 1969, he was overseeing a transition right back to civilian rule, handing over the reins to a democratically elected government. That's a pretty big deal.
And this view wasn't just held inside Ghana. Oh no. On the international stage, especially in the West, Afrifa was seen pretty favorably. I mean, this quote from the New York Times says it all. Western diplomats saw him as a dynamic leader with real democratic beliefs.
Okay, but that is only half the story. Let's flip this thing over and dig into the case for Afrifa the Opportunist, the man who critics say was driven way more by ambition than by any high-minded principles.
You see, this tendency to push back against authority, it didn't just pop up out of nowhere in 1966. Even when he was a young, super bright student, Afrifa had a history of it. In fact, he got kicked out of Addis Ababa College, not for bad grades, but for leading a student protest that spiraled into a full-blown riot. And I mean, just listen to the man himself. Even at the famous Sandhurst Military Academy in England, a place that's all about discipline, Afrifa admits he was constantly getting into trouble. His own words paint this picture of a guy who just naturally couldn't stand being told what to do. So for his critics, all this stuff, it all points to the one big thing, the cardinal sin, taking part in the overthrow of a constitutional government. Legally speaking, that was high treason. But more than that, it kind of normalized the idea that, hey, if you don't like the government, you can just remove it with guns. That one act is blamed for kicking off a whole series of copycat coups that kept Ghana unstable for years.
And then, to make things even more complicated, you've got the whole foreign involvement angle. It later came out that the CIA station chief in Accra confirmed the coup plotters, including Afrifa, didn't just get encouragement from the US, they were actually paid.
And from here, the story just takes this wild, almost unbelievable turn, one that ends in a way that he, incredibly, seemed to see coming himself.
I mean, just look at this timeline. It is an absolute roller coaster, right? From coup plotter in '66 to the actual head of state in '69. Then he retires but gets thrown in jail for trying to pull off a counter coup in '72. And then, the finale, he gets out, wins an election in '79, and in that same month, he's arrested and executed.
What a ride.
Okay, and this is where the story gets genuinely chilling. Years before he died, Afrifa started to get really worried about this cycle of coups that he helped start. He even wrote a letter to the guy who had overthrown the very government he'd put in place, and he was basically saying, "I'm scared for us." And listen to what he wrote. "I feel greatly disturbed about the future. In order to discourage the military from staging coups in the future, how about if they line all of us up and shot us one by one?" It's just an absolutely stunning thing to write, a question that turned out to be a prophecy of his own fate.
And when that end finally came for him, it wasn't slow. It was shockingly fast. He was arrested on a Friday, kept in jail for the weekend, and then shot at dawn on Tuesday morning.
There was no big trial, no real due process, just a swift, brutal end.
So, after all that, where are we? Well, we're pretty much right back where we started. The final call on Akwasi Afrifa is still very, very much up for debate. The reality is, he wasn't this pure monster. He didn't create some reign of terror and cling to power forever. But he was no saint either, not by a long shot. There's evidence that he oversaw the torture of his predecessor's guards, so his hands were definitely not clean.
And you have to remember the mood in the country when he died. His death was part of this big, dramatic operation called house cleaning. And honestly, at that specific moment in 1979, after so many years of military rule, the public was so fed up that a lot of people were actually cheering it on.
At the end of the day, Afrifa's actions really did open a can of worms, politically speaking. And it leaves us wrestling with this really tough, really profound question. If you commit treason, but you succeed, maybe you even accomplish some good things along the way, does that success somehow cancel out the original crime? Can treason ever stop being treason? That's the question history is still trying to answer.